We are here today with Richard T. Conzelmann, a 2008 inductee into the CPRS District 2 Hall of Honor in the professional category. And I want to thank Richard and Shirley for letting us come to their house and interview you. We do have other people here from our Hall of Honor committee. And we have Terry Jewell, retired as district administrator from Sunrise Recreation and Park District, and a former president of CPRS, among other things. Wayne Lowry, former administrator from Elk Grove Community. El Dorado Hills Community, Community Services District. And I believe you were with Fair Oaks Recreation and Park District at one time.
Once upon a time in Norton Manor, which is a neighbor to Fulton community.
Right.
So.
And I know you've been very active with CPRS.
Also a past president.
Also a past president. So we have quite a committee here that we're very proud of. And then Barry Truty with California Parks Recreation Department. He is a past president of our District 2 CPRS, as well as a former chair of the Hall of Honor Committee. And he is videotaping our presentation. So thank you, Dick. It is March 4th, 2016. And the professional category was developed to recognize outstanding contributions to the field of recreation, parks, and leisure services. And I'll begin by saying my name is Judy Quatrin, and I am a former faculty member from Sacramento State in the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Leisure Services. Retired now. Okay, we've all known Dick Conzelmann for many, many years and have utmost respect for him. One thing I don't know, and I think this is really important we get taken care of, your initial is T, Richard T. Conzelmann. So what is your full name?
Well, my full name is Richard Theodore.
Oh, okay.
The reason I use the T is my father's name was also Richard Conzelmann, but my father came from Germany and they don't have middle names. So when he came to this country, they challenged him for his citizenship, and so he had no middle initial, so it was NMI. So everybody thought his name was Richard, Nimi. And so they were very insistent. My godfather is who I'm named after. He was on the USS Berlin with my dad in 1928, and they were both going to San Francisco, spoke no English, but promised each other whoever had the first son they would name after the other. And so my dad lost.
Okay, and the date and place of your birth?
I was born in November 14th of 1933 in San Francisco, California, and we moved to Monterey, I believe, California in around 1936 or 37. So my hometown is really Monterey. Yeah.
So then you went to high school there?
I went to high school and graduated in 1951 and entered San Jose State that same year. And that's where I stayed and completed my education there. I have a BS degree in social welfare, and at one point was going to become a Boy Scout executive, and then another point I was going to become a YMCA secretary. And maybe if you ask me later, I'll tell you how I fell into Parks and Recreation. But yeah.
Very good. I'm assuming that you had a lot of your job intern experience that got you into our profession?
Well, basically, Judy, my intern work in college was with the YMCA in San Jose. And in fact, I had a full-time position with them when I graduated from San Jose. I also was ROTC in college. And when I graduated, I also became a second lieutenant in the reserves. And right at that point, we're just at the tail end of Korea, and they weren't calling as many on active duty. So I went into active reserves, and as it would be with the military sometimes, some months later, they decided that I would be called, so I had to report into Fort Benning, Georgia, where I went to school before I took my first assignment. So a lot of my experience prior to that was with scouting. I am an Eagle Scout, and I enjoyed my involvement with the Scout program, and certainly was a career path area that I thought I might follow. I chose not to later on, and so that probably is
Okay,
it.
great. Well, Terry is interested in asking you some questions about your career path and work history. So, Terry?
Okay, you started actually to explain this just a few minutes ago, so we'll pick it up where, how did you choose Parks and Recreation as your chosen field?
Well, that's a good question. This was somewhat of an accident. When I came out of the Army from active duty, we were looking in 1957, and there was a very high unemployment at that particular time, certainly in California. And so we were living in Salinas, which was near Fort Ord, where I had been stationed, and I had served in the Army with a guy, the colonel, who was with an insurance company, North American Insurance Company, up out of San Jose. So he invited me up for an interview, and on the day that I was taking that interview, I got a phone call from my wife, Shirley, that she had received a call from the city manager in the city of Seaside, and they were starting a brand new department, and wanted to know if I'd consider interviewing. And so I hopped in my little 56 Ford and zipped down to Seaside, which is the community right adjacent to Fort Ord, if you don't know, in Monterey. And I interviewed for their brand new position of Director of Parks and Recreation. And on the day I interviewed, I was invited that evening to the city council meeting and was hired. It was an interesting experience because I really stepped in an area where I wasn't yet prepared, but I was there almost 2 years, and a person that I've always trusted a lot and I learned a lot from was my first boss is Jim Donahue, past CPRS president, and also an RPA trustee. Anyhow, Jim was the director in Salinas, and a fellow named Pete Aldretti was the director in Monterey, and these two guys took me under their wing, and I applied and went to Salinas as the supervisor for sports, aquatics, and playgrounds and community centers, and it was a great experience. I learned from what I think was one of the best, and Salinas was an excellent area that was going through growing as well. And then I got the interest in wanting to, I started reading about special districts. All my experience had been with cities, and I wanted to know more about districts, and a job opened up, a brand new department just being started in Marin County called Terra Linda. And in that particular case, the president of the board came to Salinas, talked to people, and then eventually interviewed me and offered me the job as the administrator for Terra Linda. So we packed up and moved to Marin County. That was a great experience. Brand new district in a very interesting community that was built by Joe Eigler, which is different types of homes. And The only problem with it was they wanted me to live in the community, and it was extremely expensive. And so Joe Eichler hired me to do some work in San Jose for him, part-time. And then there was a brand-new community that he was building called Lucas Valley, another Eichler project. So I helped set up their community center and swimming pool complex. So between the three exposures, that's kind of how I got involved with the special districts. While there, I met a lady named Betty Forey. She was the chairman of the California State Parks, Recreation, and Park Commission at that time. She lived in Marinwood, which was right next door to Carolyn. And so she kind of took a shine to me and kind of had me follow her around and go to different areas and meetings. And I finally figured out why. She was the former director from the Fulton El Camino Recreation and Park District. And when she was tabbed for the state board of directors, and she knew they were going to need an administrator. So she talked me into applying, and I did. And I was the next to last interview that they had. And interestingly enough, historically, the last interview was to be a telephone interview, and that interview was with Palmer Slack. And obviously, as it turned out, I got the job, but Palmer also interviewed with Bill Pond, and that's when he came out and worked for the county. So I don't know where that's taken us, but I think that gets us up to Fulton El Camino.
I have a question. What years, what time, what decades did that span?
What decade? 1964 is
Okay.
when I was hired in Fulton El Camino.
And before that, when you first was hired in Seaside?
I didn't retire in Seaside.
No, hired.
I was hired in Seaside in 57.
Okay,
I was there till 59, and then Salinas from 59 to 62.
good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, to kind of extend from your job at Fulton El Camino and take it up to retirement, what are other positions that you've held
Yeah.
in those time frames?
I left Fulton El Camino in 1969. Our family had done a lot of traveling up the North Coast, and we kind of fell in love with the Redwoods and the city of Eureka, and we just wanted to explore. And I applied for and was hired as the Director of Parks and Recreation in the city of Eureka. A very unique job. I was also the director of the Sequoia Park Zoo, which was a real challenge and interesting. I also was responsible to maintain and operate a cemetery, so I was the sexton of the cemetery. I had to take care of burials and so forth and so on. And the fun part of that, in addition to those responsibilities, was in a small city, sometimes department heads have to carry more than one hat. And eventually, I helped raise the monies, and we built a fish processing plant, which was badly needed, which was under a different program. And that was a real challenge, but it was a lot of fun. So it was a very interesting position. I eventually became headed up the personnel department for the city manager, and eventually I became the assistant city manager. And so that was a wonderful experience. It was different. In 1977, it was a time to think about moving on. I had been president of CPRS in 1976, and I think, as we know, if those that have had the privilege to be in that role, you're probably pretty marketable. At least people are looking at you and asking you. So, and it was a good time financially to move along. My oldest daughter was married in 77, and I still had a son and two more daughters. And so I was offered a job in Semi Valley, Recreation Park District, and I also interviewed with the city of Ventura, but Vallejo Recreation and Park District was open, and the final analysis, that's the job I elected to take, and that was in 1977 with having no idea, how long that might be there, and 16 years later, I retired in 93. So, long answer, but that's the question.
So you covered a lot of areas, things that you've done, but what do you consider to be your most significant contribution? And also, because it could be something different, something that you're particularly proud of.
Yeah, I have to think about that one a little bit. I was in the Fulton El Camino years. I was very proud of the fact that I don't want you guys to get this wrong, but some of the best staff I've ever worked with. I was very proud of that. One of the reasons I mention that is that, and maybe sometime later we'll talk more about it, but when we came to Fulton El Camino, I was a captain in the reserves, active reserves. I was expected to be commanding a company in the Sacramento area. I still had, I had 2 children and 2 more eventually coming along. And I returned to college because when I left Salinas, I was 18 or 20 units into my master's, which I had started at San Jose, and I wanted to resume that program, and I did at Sacramento. But all of a sudden, I discovered I found myself coming and going. There was not enough hours to balance between my family, my job, reserves, and reserves were becoming much more demanding. And frankly, I had completed my obligation, which, in fact, I exceeded it. So I made the decision to leave the reserves, and so I had discharged. And as I was working through the college thing, I sat down one day with a friend of ours, of all of ours, that we call Shockey, Dr. Needy. And we sat and talked about my frustrations of what was going on. And I can't get this back to you word for word, but basically what Shockey said to me was, "Councilman, have you ever applied for a job that you didn't get?" And the answer was no. He said, the greatest thing that you could do rather than continuing on your master's and running around is to make sure that your agency develops an open door policy for putting interim students in there to do field work. And some have asked, there's a lot of alumni from Fulton El Camino, and I took that to heart. I withdrew from the master's program. I'd been taking classes with Dr. Kammeyer, and in fact helped teach one of her classes, which was kind of fun. I guess, to get back to the question, I considered that opportunity with Dr. Needy and what he suggested and directed me to do, it's a great accomplishment because the people that I was able to bring on board to the Judy Quatrons and the Don Clickards and the Terry Jules, and it kind of goes on and on, great people that worked during that time. So I may not have really answered your question, Terry, but that kind of sticks out of my mind is.
So professional development of younger, newer
Yep.
people into this.
I think that's so important.
Okay.
I think it's what we really need to do. So.
Okay. So you may have even touched on it with Dr. Needy, but who were your mentors at your various stages of your growth?
Yeah, my first mentors, in my opinion, in the field of recreation and parks was clearly Jim Donahue, who was the director in Salinas, and Pete Aldretti, who was the director in Monterey. Those two kind of took me on. They both went, Pete to Monterey and Jim to Salinas in the same year, almost the same month. And Salinas and Monterey are driving distance, as you probably know, 25 minutes maybe. And they took me to my very first CPRS conference, which was in Santa Monica, as I recall. My agency wasn't going to finance me to go. This was Seaside, brand new situation. And so I drove down with Jim and Pete, and I stayed in this, the three of us stayed in the same room. Pete was usually sleeping in the bathtub, but he wasn't always there a lot. And I don't know how many people remember Pete Aldretti, but he was a great guy, a lot of fun. And, but both of them, particularly Jim would make, he at the time, he was treasurer of CPRS, and the board meetings were held in the bathhouse in Dick Anthony's, which was over in the valley, and I've forgotten where at the moment, but it may come to me. Jim would meet, we'd get in the car and we'd, after work, and drive up over to the valley, and I'd sit there and met a lot of people and learned a lot about CPRS, and those were one of the conditions in which Jim hired me, is that I had to join CPRS to make sure that I participated in it. And so I would say overall in Parks and Recreation, he was probably one of the finest teachers. We did a lot of things together, family-wise as well, and we spent many years working what was originally the Bing Crosby AT&T tournament, where each year all the recreation agencies in the Bay Area of Monterey are recipients of the Crosby tournaments, the money, all the community centers, et cetera, and that was kind of really neat. So, but you had to work at the tournament, which was a gas. Yeah.
Were there any of your, who were your peers at that time, kind of moving through that Jim and those were probably the older? Any others?
Yeah, I would say the peer group for me would be more in, by the time I got to Fulton El Camino, Bill Besso, Paul Hagan, Terry Ashford from Auburn. We had a gentleman from the city of Reading, Meredith, can't remember the last name. They were all in special districts, and so we had a lot of things to talk about, to exchange, and where Steve Walker was a member of that group, same area. And yeah, I would say that was the peer group primarily for me at that time. Yeah.
The political environment, when you were kind of getting started, what was that like? Was that Parks and Recreation? What is that? Or how was Parks and Recreation viewed?
Yeah, you know, it changes a little bit over the time, and I think it will continue to do so. But in my very first job, which I took probably out of total unemployment, stepped out of the Army, and there I had no money and a family. It was a city that was not very well thought of, a lot of sand dunes, still some of it is. It was a city that was known for two things, basically, bars and gambling rooms, and the other was prostitution. And that was the recreation for Seaside, huh? Yeah. Fort Ord had some influence in those days. The city council didn't really want a park and recreation department, as it turns out. The city manager did, and he prevailed, but politically it was not a good situation. It was not a healthy situation, and I was, disappointed, but in 18 months, it was clear to me that where I wanted to be going professionally was not going to be there. In Salinas, a different story, a different economy, a different cross-section of people, an excellent department, good facilities, and that were continuing to grow. And in those days, Salinas was expanding. There was an area called Al LaSalle, other communities on the periphery. And when I got to Marin County, it was very exciting. Brand new community of brand new homes. The community was, because of Eichler, was predominantly Jewish, And, and there was a very close relationship that people had with each other that comes through their faith and through their, and so, and it was also a very proud community. They would boast the fact that they were ethnically diverse. And I kind of always chuckled. One of my board members there was the president of Standard Oil. It was he was Japanese, and they were also proud of the fact that we had black in the community, and why not? It was Abe Woodson from the 49ers. That was kind of, the kind of community. So it was very exciting. We built a community center and a swimming pool. We built a couple of parks. I hired a park superintendent who came from Holland, Cornelius Goree, a great guy. We were a two-man department. I did the programming and the administration, and he took care of the facilities. That's where Don Clickard comes into my life, although I knew Don from from Monterey, and Don did his field work at Terra Linda. When I got to Sacramento, to Fulton El Camino, a whole different story again. The suburbs had been created, and what happened to Parks and Recreation for Sacramento? They didn't want to be in the city. People were moving into the suburbs, and they wanted their facilities now. They wanted their swimming pool and their community centers, and they were willing to do something about it. And what did they do? They created Parks and Recreation districts in the 50s. Cordova and Fulton El Camino were two of the first. Then Arden Manor and Arden Park was there, and there was Windermere. I believe at one point with 13 or 14 special districts. And these are all from the 50s, late 50s, 56 to 60 creation. It was exciting times as far as I was concerned. They loved Parks and Recreation. We worked well with the San Juan Unified School District. Probably talk about that at some other time, but it was exciting times. I think that probably, for me, it was one of the more exciting times. I loved the fact that I had a board that was willing to let us explore and try things. The development of the Valley Foothill Swim League at that point in time. The family camp that we created with San Juan Unified School District, they owned a camp on a PG&E lake in Soda Springs, and we had developed a camp up there, and it was, well, I will admit, it was my idea, but Bill Bessel certainly should get credit for it. We talked about why don't they use the camp on weekends, because it was just Monday through Friday. And we said, yeah, we could do a family camp. We could get people who had never gone camping, and all they had to do is bring a sleeping bag, and we'd staff it and so forth and so on. So we worked with the school district, and the guy at the time who we had worked with was a character. His name was Jim Winters, and he was the director of recreation for the San Juan Unified School District, and fabulous character, a real character. But he went along with things, and we had a great relationship. We all made our swimming pools available to the schools that didn't have pools for their swimming programs. And so it was a great exchange of how the schools and parks and recreation can work together. And economically, everybody benefits by that, not duplicating facilities. So we started family camp, and that's probably one of the more fun things we ever did up there. We'd go up on Friday night, and we had people and their kids, and they slept in their tent cabins, and we hired the staff from the school district. They did the cooking, and we had the main dining room. We put on campfire programs every night, and it was great. I think it still is. I've heard that they're still going up there. So that was just another plus of what was going on through the 60s in the suburban areas. People just loved, clamored, went to everything. And I guess the other highlight, and that probably I should have mentioned earlier, is that two of the challenges that I thought were terrific in Fulton El Camino in my career area, I ran into some property known called Bohemian Gardens, and a pretty good sized piece of property. It also had a small swimming pool on it, and then the rest of it was vacant land, and it seemed to me that Fulton El Camino was not going to be able to continue to exist if it didn't expand its boundaries. We needed to get bigger. And Bohemian Gardens was in an area that was adjacent. And so we started inquiring, and we discovered that actually the Bohemian Gardens had a board of directors, but we didn't know all the names of the people. And we found out a guy named Jerry Strezick, wife, or she had divorced him. And in the divorce, he gave her Bohemian Gardens, all the land and the pool and everything's on there. Well, turns out that one cannot give to someone else something that is run by a board of directors, and that he was the only surviving director of 3. And so, as he said at some later date, I'll give you, the Golden Gate Bridge if you want it. It's up to you to prove that that it's yours. And so he knew exactly what he was doing. What he did is he got even with his ex-wife. And so Don McMurtry, whose name we know well, legal counsel for our district, I dragged him out, and we figured out, we contacted Jerry, who was living in Nevada, I think it was Reno at the time, and we paid for a plane ticket, and we met him at the Sacramento Inn where he used to hang out. We took him to lunch, and we got all the information. We got him to appoint 2 new people to the Bohemian Board of Directors. Then they had a vote, and that was to turn the land over to the Fulton El Camino Recreation Park District. And that's how we got ownership of about $283,000 worth of property for a plane ticket and a lunch. And Don McMurtry, our legal counsel, is probably one of the greatest guys in my life. He was willing to take a chance on a young administrator trying to do something for the community that could work, and it worked. That, and I think probably the creation of the community center.
So was the boundary of the park of Fulton El Camino expanded to include that area, or did it already exist
Yeah,
inside the boundary?
Bohemian area was actually still inside the boundaries, but we did annex the land all the way along the freeway, so that we became more of a triangle at one end, went up to, and then back on Watt Avenue.
So was that land in the city boundary at that time? Or-
No, the part of the district that was and still is in the city boundaries is where the shopping center is.
But it wasn't in a county service area or something
No,
like that?
no, it was unserviced area.
Okay.
We picked up, of course, the freeway property value of the businesses that were in there, the taxes. And that was always the thing with the city of Sacramento about well, yeah, they felt that the residents in the area by the shopping center were being double taxed, district tax in the city. I struck a deal with the first director who was there when I came, was Reg Renfrey. He ran the city of Sacramento and the golf courses, and we used to every year, I guess we can say this, I get a letter from Reg saying, Happy New Year and glad have a good year and so forth, and inside would be my annual pass to the golf course. You can't do that anymore. But I made a deal with a guy named Doc Wisham. Doc became the director in Sacramento, and Doc said as long as we continued to do what we were doing and doing it as well as we were, there was really no pressure from the city of Sacramento on the district. And true to his word, there never was. But Doc came from Wasco, so he had a district background there. So where is that?
Were there any other major issues over your career that you'd care to add to what you haven't already said?
Well, issues that I wanted to mention, the community center I thought was a highlight for us. The fun part of that is that the board was very excited about the possibility of doing further development at Howe Park, which was a very large and very unusual facility. We had the world's largest free-floating, irregular-shaped swimming pool, which I'm sad to this day is no longer there, but it was a great facility. And we had this extra land, and we had this lake there and so forth. We hired a marvelous architectural firm, and the principal of the firm that I worked with particularly, the 2 of us took sleeping bags and we went out and slept in the park to try to get a feeling about what we wanted to do. Initially, it was to get a building away from the parking lots. That's since been changed. But to orient it to water and to land surfaces, to get it so that the sunlight off of windshields wouldn't bounce on the building, and to provide access for all people, wheelchaired or walkers or whatever, in addition. So it was a facility, a commitment of love, trying to put that together, and the fact that it's still there.
Question, do you remember the architectural firm?
Yeah, Starks, Josen, and Knock.
Good, okay,
Yeah.
that's something to,
Yeah.
okay, great, thank you.
Proposition 13 and what that did to Parks and Recreation. That was-
Yeah. Well, when Prop 13 came on board, I was in.
I think you had probably just left Fulton El Camino.
Yeah,
70.
78 was that, yeah.
You were Eureka, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's no question about the fact that Prop 13 did affect Parks and Recreation financially. In spite of that issue, we were, in the North Coast area, it wasn't quite as dramatic. We didn't have that many facilities, certainly early on, but we were very successful in getting grants that were made available through State Department. In my years, I worked a lot with staff that were very helpful in helping agencies get through that critical period of time. Russ Porter, former member of the State Department of Recreation, worked with grants programs a lot, and was another great friend and a great mentor. In the 90s, the 80s, getting right into the 80s were very good for me because I had moved to Vallejo, and Vallejo was seeing a lot of development going on, and they had never looked into the possibility of park dedication fees. And so we were able to sit down with all of the developers. I went through the building industry people first and got them convinced that parks would help sell their homes if they invested in it. And I wanted them to donate land, and then I wanted them to pay a fee per bedroom for each house they put up. And I'm very happy about the fact during those years, we did $22 million worth of park dedication activities simply on that basis of developers getting involved. And ultimately, they thought it was the best thing that ever happened to them because their parks in their area, they were able to advertise it at their trailers or wherever they were, look what we're going to do, and then do it. And so the 80s were really very productive in that agency, and probably pretty much so in others. Comes the 90s, and things are not quite the same. We saw that with a variety of things that were happening around us, that Parks Recreation were having to do some cutbacks, both in staffing and changing some things in facilities. So, yeah, we survived Prop 13. I always felt it was something that really cut off our nose to spite our face when the people did that. It just wasn't making a lot of good sense. But Parks and Recreation are survivors. I always felt that no matter what, we were going to make it. And we did. I really think that by and large, even if you had to adjust and change staffing and sizes, people still wanted quality for their leisure time. And it was our job to make sure that we had it. Facilities. Yep.
I think you've already answered the question of what you were most proud of while at Fulton El Camino with the Bohemian Park as well as the pool and the community center. How about memorable moments? Sometimes those aren't the same as most proud of. Anything that...
Memorable moments. Well, I'd have to say that when I came when I moved from District 1, where I had been president of CPRS District 1, I moved to District 2. I never served as president of District 2, Terry, by the way, because I was state director the entire time I was in District 2. I think that was pretty memorable to me because it was through that avenue of being the director for District 2 and getting on the state board and then chairing the personnel committee, which was relatively new, developing exams and giving exams. So I believed then, and I still believe, that Parks and Recreation should have certification. I think it's an important element, and we should always encourage it. And so we moved on in those days, and that kind of threw me into the role. I got elected to be vice president, president-elect, and certainly 1976 was exciting. Bicentennial year, president of State Society. In those days there were 4,000 members, and I was in Eureka, and I had a city manager that believed that because of our isolated area, that we should all stay and be involved in our professional organizations. And as it would be clear to know, I had to do a lot of flying to go to meetings. And it was always a real challenge because of the fog that was in the North Coast. So sometimes an overnight trip became at least 2 days to get back in. But that probably was a real highlight to me. Leading the group back to the National Recreation Park Conference, which was in Boston in 1976, was kind of an exciting. Shirley went with me, and we took my mother, as a matter of fact. She had a great time, and there's some stories I can't tell, but anyhow, it was good. So yeah, that was memorable because I believed in it. When I stepped out of CPRS, again, I mentioned job-wise opportunities, which are great. I had ultimately two daughters and my wife all in college at the same time, so it was neat to be in a community where I could make a little money. But I think that was exciting. From there became a trustee for National Recreation Park Association. I traveled, and I was in those days in Vallejo. I had a board that was extremely supportive of being involved with professional organizations. I did a lot of travel during those years with NRPA, and that was very exciting because you could see what you were doing across the country, and I always felt so very, very fortunate that I was in California, because I've always felt, and I still do, that we're still heads and shoulders above Parks and Recreation and other parks. And to say nothing against other parks, it's just that it's the quality of what I see and what we were doing was there.
You mentioned earlier the Valley Foothill Swim League. How did that get formed?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Fulton Community had a swim team, and Arden Park had a swim team, Arden Manor had a swim team, Auburn Recreation Park District, City of Davis, and all of a sudden it seemed like, well, that was a perfect, bringing together. All the directors of all of those departments were all CPRS members, and our families all knew each other and so forth. And as in my case, I had 2 kids who were swimming on the team, so it was kind of natural. And I think Bill Bessel would be probably the one I would accredit it to, because Bill had a background in aquatics. He was a diver at Sac State, and a very good one. And Bill knew aquatics in and out. And I had built and run swimming pools down in Salinas, and so I had a background in aquatics. Terry Ashford certainly knew it, as having been on staff in Auburn for a long time. He went there as a young intern, and then superintendent eventually, and a director. So it was just a coming together and saying, why don't we develop a swim program where we could compete against each other, home and home, and this type of thing. And we'd end up the year with a meet involving all of the teams in one place. And they said, what were we going to call it? And we sat there, and I think I might have been the one that says, we're in Sacramento Valley, and Auburn's in the foothill. Well, it sounds like Valley Foothill would be a good name, and that's what it became. Yeah.
Okay. The profession goes through lots of changes over an extended period of time, but how does today compare with, say, the 70s? How has the profession changed from your perspective?
You know, I've been thinking about that one. I'm not sure that, you know, once you retire and move yourself away, you don't necessarily keep up with everything. It's been 23 years since I retired, but I still participate. I go to conferences on alternate years as a rule. And of course, as a past CPRS president, I'm able to contact and talk to past CPRS and those that are still active on there. I think things are, I don't want to say more professional, but I would say that the staffing people that I see, my observations recently at District 2's meeting, I thought that the District 2 staff did a fine job in what they were doing. And to me, that was emblematic, I think, of all of the districts in California. The president that just stepped out up from CPRS, Tim, he's now in Livermore, but when he left the city of Woodland and I was retired, I was hired as the interim director in Woodland. So I got to know Tim pretty well, Barry, and I thought then, and I think now, that he had great talent. And I think he was a good president for us this past year. By and large, I think our staffing are more educated. I think they're not more motivated, because they are motivated, but I think that they have the talents and the tools and are able to try new things and are getting, because I think we've gone through some economically bad times, and some of the staffs have had to be reduced in size. There's no question about that. And so you're having to do, sometimes you're having to do more with less. And I think these people that we have today, that's the change, I think. I see that they are able to do more. I could think Parks Recreation has a great future out there. There will always be a need.
What do you think is their biggest challenge facing that profession today?
I'd like to think about that one a little bit, maybe come back to it. Rather than just off the hip, I'm not sure I know what the biggest challenge is. The obvious would be economically, you know, that our budgets would still continue to be there, that they will continue to grow from year to year. Here where I live in a Sun City community, and we have a board of directors and we have a budget, and we've seen our assessments go up on average at least 5% a year. Same thing I think is true no matter where, and that, you know, in our case, we're assessed for it, but in cases of other districts and the cities, it has to do with tax rates and the ability to raise. I think that will continue to be a challenge, but I don't have any, that challenge is easily met by Parks and Rec. I just think we have the ability to do that.
So to extend that out, what does your crystal ball tell you from your experience? What's it going to look like in 20 years?
Oh my, you know what, Terry, I don't buy green bananas either. I would like to think that in 20 years it'll be even better, that we'll have good facilities. I know we're going to have quality people who will be there, and they're going to get good training, and then when it's their turn to take over, I think they'll do well. I have a young granddaughter who says she wants to go into Parks Recreation. I think she'd be doing a good job, so, yeah.
So finally, for me anyway, what's the biggest risk you ever took, and what was the result of that risk?
The biggest risk.
In the profession.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm kind of curious about
Yeah, I
that.
kind of like that one myself. Huh?
It takes off.
Okay, well, setting that one aside, I'd have to say, and we've talked about it, in the Fulton Hill community years, the biggest risk was thinking that I could acquire the Bohemian Garden property for the district, because that was a risk. And if it hadn't been for Don McBurchie, it probably wouldn't have worked. But I think I laid my job on the line to try to convince our board that I could bring online that property, and that we could do it as economically as we could. That was a risk. You know, I think there's risks every day, but that one always stands in my mind, is that I know Don and I have talked about that over the years, and you know, but if you don't take risks, then you never get anything done. And I suppose being a risk taker is important sometimes.
Well, thank you, Terry. That was,
Thank you.
yeah, good questions. And Wayne Lowry's going to do the next category,
Oh,
professional service.
past President Wayne Lowry.
Yeah, professional service and awards. Would you like to take a break right now, or?
You can do, I'm fine, it's up to the
I'm going
operator.
to stop. Okay, Ron. Before I get into the questions, a couple comments. One is you referenced Tim Berry, and I don't know if you're aware, but Tim was also spent some time at Seaside. So we have another president that's evolved from a
Yep.
very small little agency that it was probably a challenging job.
That's right.
So,
Yep.
and then a personal comment, I started in Parks and Recreation at Sac State in the late 60s. And the park and recreation professionals that were in the field, you know, some of them were sitting in the class with me, even though they were full-time administrators someplace. But all of you, and I consider you one of them, were very open to students being involved and being supported
Oh,
and
yeah.
encouraged to participate in CPRS. And frankly, my whole career sprung off of that enthusiasm, passion that you guys had, and kind of embedded in a lot of us at that time, Terry and I was.
You were in our good group, so that was fun, yeah.
The administrators around Sacramento, whether it was the Larry Seifers or the ones you mentioned, Charlie Haver, all of them were just awesome people to be around, so very inspiring. Thank you for that. The series of questions I have more about your involvement in professional organizations. You mentioned CPRS in RPA and so forth, but you were also involved with Association of Recreation Park Districts, I'm thinking, and remember
Sure.
in the 80s, we went through that problem with insurance.
Yep. Yep.
Can you give us some background of your participation?
You bet. No, good question. I'm happy to, because I think that was important. CARPD has been around for many, many years, and hopefully all districts belonged to it. It was a chance for our board members to meet with other board members and exchange the fact that maybe their problems weren't as bad as they thought they were. But we used to have a director from time to time, and we used to have some pretty great meetings. CRPD was an excellent organization, and loved the fact that periodically their annual meetings would be in places like Lake Tahoe, or but sometimes that didn't work out so well. But yes, CARPD, I enjoyed being a part of that, and the boards that I worked with always enjoyed that as well and participated in it. When I was in Vallejo, my board chair was chair of CARPD, Liddell Montgomery, you might remember the name. Let me talk about, I'm glad you brought it up. Two things happened to us in the 60s that were really important. Agencies were having a really tough time getting insurance, and it was very, very expensive, and we were looking for ways on how to deal with that. And we sat down, a group of administrators and so forth, and then we involved Don McMurtry, who was, at the time, was legal counsel for at least two of the districts. Later, he helped Southgate and others, but initially it was Cordova and Fulton El Camino. We wanted to know that if we formed a group, if we could acquire insurance, and we went through CARPD initially to do that. It became a spin-off of the special districts. And the acronym that came out of there was called CAPRI, California Association of Insurance, so forth, districts. It turned out, and still is, to my knowledge, a very excellent program. We had a board of directors, of which I served on, the first one, and Don became the executive director, our lead counsel. And we did a great job of making sure, and we had an excellent program. Eventually, we hired a full-time executive. That was Jack Rawolf, replaced Don, and I know he's retired now. But we did inspections of districts. They hired in a
Risk manager.
Risk manager, yeah, so that that could go around. And that just proved to be a wonderful thing, I think, for the district, certainly was for me at the time. Conversely, the other big issue was workman's compensation was just going out the window financially. District, I mean, here we had these people working for us, and we had to have workman's comp, and so we sat down with Don and said, you know, what's the chances of forming a joint powers authority? Again, through CARPD, which was our parent organization. And so we sat around and decided what we could do. And one day, I don't know that Don McMurtry has ever will or has forgiven me yet, but he said, what should we call this? And I said, PARDEC, of course. Well, unfortunately, that worked. It is Park and Recreation, you know, Association personnel. And so it still is called PARDEC today. And Don always gives me a bad time. That was my fault because it was so long. But those two programs through CARPD have been wonderful. And I'm talking about all districts in California. I mean, not just the 13 or 14 up here in the north and the Sacramento area. All of the districts, Semi Valley and the rest of them were all part of. Jerry Gladden was one that was very involved with us at the time. So.
Yeah, and I think that was a model that the California CSDA Association developed their model on.
They did.
For SDR base, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a big accomplishment. So, well, you were involved with all these organizations. Were there processes you put in place to ensure that they would continue to grow and evolve past your participation?
Well, no pride of ownership. There was never any doubt in my mind that what we had done, we did legally and did well, and as long as CARPD continued, as board members continued to provide guidance, and that we had good administrators, and we all had to buy into what we were doing. I mean, if you didn't, then your agency probably wasn't going to be involved. And I'm sure over time there may have been occasions where that has happened. I'm sure, being that some districts are still probably dependent districts versus independent, there may be occasion where dependent district, dependent to the county, might not, because of their county had a program, and I don't know. I've stepped away too long ago. I think as long as the parent organization recognized that the success of those two programs, that it'll always be there and should, in my opinion.
And it sounded like you also picked up what your Eureka City manager's philosophy was and made sure that your staff continued to be involved in
Oh, yes.
so
Yeah.
that you were perpetuating it that way. So,
Yeah.
this next question is about awards and recognition you've received, and I apologize, I'm going to have to read it because the list is too long for me to memorize and say out loud. But I see on here the California Park and Recreation Site Fellowship Award in 1978, NRPA Distinguished Fellow Award in 83, Special Achievement Award, Honorary Life Membership in CPRS in 93, and the induction into the CPRS District 2 Recreation Park and Leisure Hall of Fame, which we referenced earlier, professional category in 2008. How do you perceive your being recognized, receiving these awards, helped your communities? How did that come back to your agency to benefit?
Well, I would like to think that the agencies that I was with during the times of receiving those recognitions, which were very nice, benefited from my interaction with other administrators and other boards in other areas of the country, because I always felt that I brought back from meetings with me and learned things that were able to be implemented in the agency that I was with. I know that when I received, CPRS fellowship, that's from your fellow professionals, and you gain an interaction as a result of that. And if you go through the chairs, you have broad contact with an awful lot of people, and so you're very involved with what they're doing, and you want to know more about it, and so forth. So I always felt that recognitions are very nice. They occupy space on your wall someplace, but it's what you do, it's what you are, it's how you feel. I always have gone by the motto myself. Recognitions that may not have one there. I was a Rotarian for 34 years, past president of Rotary, and I'm a Paul Harris Fellow. And I always felt that was really an important acknowledgement. My oldest daughter is a past president of the Eugene, Oregon Rotary, and she too is a Paul Harris Fellow. So it's kind of type of thing. Members of my family have always been involved in doing things and working for others, making them feel better. Shirley, my darling of 61 years, was a great school teacher. And yeah, I was always proud of the recognitions, but they're only just as a result of you doing something, not just sitting around and saying, oh yeah, let's get rid. We have our past president scholarship program, and which is nice. Oh yeah, who did we not recognize yet? Oh yeah, it must be that person. It should be for a little different than that, but that's another issue.
So I notice a recurring theme is always, it's about the networking side and
Yeah.
how the professionals support each other and
Yeah.
trade information and stuff. It's amazing taking sometimes reluctant board members who are elected to office to a conference, and they come back and they go, well, I met so-and-so, I talked to them. You know that they're doing this over in
Yeah.
Vallejo or wherever,
Yep.
and it's, that's, people don't realize how important that is because it's not on the program.
That's right. No,
So, anyway,
no, I think that's very important, and I think that's what we take away.
yeah, thank you.
Deb?
Well, we're moving on to personal and family questions.
Back to the high-risk question.
Yeah. So here I am. We're going to start by, who do you think influenced you most as you were growing up in your life?
I didn't have a tough time with putting that answer into myself. I called her Nana. It was my grandmother. It was my mother's mother. And this is the reason. As I was growing up, my grandmother and her second husband had a fruit ranch in Hayward. And every summer, I would go to the ranch, and I would live in a tent, and I would pick fruit in the mornings, cherries and apricots and berries. And then we put the lugs on the back of a 1926 flatbed truck, and we'd take them to the cannery. And then in the afternoon, my grandmother would say, now, you can go pick some baskets of cherries and lugs of apricots, and you can sit out on the highway that runs in front of the ranch and sell them. And whatever you get for them is money you will earn for the summer. And when the fruit season was over, we'd pack up in this 26 Dodge flatbed and head to the Santa Cruz Mountains, where the family had a little cabin up on the side of a hill. No water, no lights, a couple of outhouses out a ways, and but an absolutely beautiful area in the redwoods and in the madrone trees and so forth. Anyhow, my grandmother and I would then spend the rest of the summer, just the two of us up there. We'd have to hike down to the Garapata Creek and get bottled water. Maybe some people remember the old brown Clorox bottles. We had to clean those out really good, and then we would put them on a rope so they'd hang one on each side, and we'd all the way steep down to the creek and get fresh water and bring it up. And the reasons I mentioned the influence we had, she'd take me out for walks every day, and she would point out every shrub and every tree, and she had a name for it. And every footprint that we would see, this one is a bobcat, and that's a deer, and that's from another animal. And then she'd bring a coffee can and make up a plaster of Paris, and we would pour with a coffee can over that and pour this plaster of Paris, and when it dried and you turned it over, you had the imprint of the animal or the leaf. So it was something that just, for me, was very important. I was an only child, and my dad, coming from Europe, was a very strict person. He never understood what I ended up doing, by the way. My dad was not raised to do, it was fun and games in his mind, and didn't really understand parks recreation. But that didn't change anything. What I learned from my grandmother was a love for nature, an understanding of the world around us, that you could do things and that we could work with people. It would be fun. And she lived to be 94, and she was beloved by my children as well. She was their great-grandmother. So that she was very influential to me in that regard. Only other person that I could think of when I read about possibly on there, I mentioned earlier on that I was in scouting, and scouting was for the war years, for me, scouting was my, it was it. I had a scoutmaster. His name was Lefty Sproul, retired Army. Lefty Sproul, and he had been a lieutenant in the First World War, and had been partially injured. But anyhow, he became scoutmaster, and he was just somebody unbelievable of a kind. And he cared for his troops, and he taught us, and he went with us, and he got me involved with scouting. I ran the waterfront at a camp called Camp Estlin, which is down in Big Sur. Worked on the scout staff in the summers, and brought other people in to the troop. I was very honored to have earned my Eagle Badge at age 14. I was the youngest in the United States at that time, and 1948, and I was selected in 1950 to go to the World Jamboree, which was in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And I went as one of the leaders. There were two of us. And my trip was paid for by the Elks Club, I think. Yeah, I think it was an Elks Foundation. Anyhow, that was a great experience. Traveled by train and lived on train, did the entire United States. And ended up in Valley Forge for a week, camping out there, and a storm came in and blew all our tents away. But
Valley Forge.
that was Valley Forge, and someday, if you ever want to know, I can give you a whole story on that particular issue. But those were very interesting things that happened in my life.
Yeah, I didn't know the Eagle Scout. That's wonderful. Youngest at that time.
I was, yeah. That's what they told me.
Now, you've
I still have the card.
You've mentioned several role models, and perhaps you've mentioned a couple heroes in your lifetime for you. Is there anybody else that you would like to mention that you think have influenced?
Yeah, I'd like to mention my darling wife, Shirley, of 61 years last January. Shirley is a role model in my life. She's besides being my wife, she's a giver, and she's a giver and a teacher, and she's a great mother. And we have 7 grandchildren, and she's a great grandmother. And 6 months ago, we became a great grandmother and father. And we have another great granddaughter coming in June. I think that Shirley is a staple in our family. I think all of our children and grandchildren, they really relate to Graham. And she's been a great supporter to put up with me as long as she has. And so she is a role model. I really think so. She is for our family. And so I would mention that in person.
Well, personally, I've known both of you for decades, and you both are outstanding individuals.
Oh, thank you.
Your most cherished family tradition for you and Shirley, what would that be?
Well, I think if Shirley were here, she'd probably come out of it. It's getting together with our family. I think it would be the holiday times, or visit up to showing up those who show up the cabin. I guess that's probably been over the years. Probably our favorite tradition is to spend 10 days in Kauai. We love going to the island once in a while. But family tradition, again, I would go back. Every Valentine's Day, and I think Easter, those holidays particularly, all of the grandkids receive a card, and there's always $5 in it. And it's never changed. I have grandson 32 years old who still gets a card with $5 in it. But it's something that when they were little, Shirley started, and they love it. At Christmas time, because my mother started at one time, they now have what they call Papa Bucks. It's on the Christmas tree, and whenever grandkids are here at Christmas time, and there are usually several, on the tree they'll find an envelope, and in that envelope will be at least $20. But they call it Papa Bucks. They used to call it Graham Bucks. That was my mother was called Graham. And so, yeah,
Great, those are
that's a tradition.
very good, yeah, no, that's important, it's very important. Going on, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were young?
Well, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of my body. That's for sure. Getting old is not for, wusses. And what do I know now? Well, I don't know, Judy. There's nothing in my mind that I think I would have ever done differently. Maybe tried another approach or brought some other people in or whatever. But I loved every agency that I was privileged to serve. I do believe in service above self, and I do believe it should be fair to all who are concerned. And if you're a Rotarian, you know where those come from. But I do believe in that. I think that that's what I've always tried to ask is when I've made decisions, when I've had staff that came in and they wanted to do something and I really wasn't in tune with it, I really had to stop sometimes and I've made mistakes along the line in that area, and so you have to stop and think about whether it's fair and not killing a good idea and this type of thing. So that's a hard one, and I don't think maybe I'm. Ask me again someday.
I would like to invite Barry or Terry or Wayne, anybody else has something you'd like to ask.
You mentioned you keep in touch with the past presidents of CPRS. What other park and recreation people you worked with are you still close to?
Well, I link a lot with Charlie Hafer. Charlie's not well, and he fell, and he's in a brace now from waist up to back. He's doing better. We stay in contact. Obviously, I stay in contact with Terry Jewell. He takes care of me a lot and makes sure I get places and so forth. And we're very fond of the Jewell family, so I like to keep up with Terry and Lynn. At Christmas time, I hear from my friend Richard Johns. He lives up in Oregon, and he was the director in Santa Barbara, and eventually he was president of NRPA. So I'm very proud of him. And he was a fieldwork student at Fulton El Camino as well. Yeah. And I hear from, as we all do, I hear from Barry Weiss periodically. And there's more newer people now, and so when you look back over who's still around at 23, I'm always surprised to find that Grant Mainland is still with us. He's got to be the oldest living past president. In fact, before we were called CPRS, it was CPA or whatever, CPRS. I miss tremendously my good friend Mary Grogan. We were very close. She was like my sister, and that was somebody I was close with. I miss Palmer Slack. We've lost him, and Henry Angonia, bless his little heart. He was a character in many ways. And of the group, the only other one that I get with periodically is Bill Besso. They live in Yuba City, and periodically Bill and his wife Roseanne come this way. I don't know what's flying around. And once in a while I hear from Jerry Hughes. He's still in Chico. And ex-staff members that I still get in contact, of course, is Don Clickard in Atascadero, and Dennis Beardsley, who's in lives just outside of Tacoma in, I've forgotten that place where he lives, nice place up there. I email a lot.
You know, he moved to Washington.
He lives in Gig Harbor,
Okay.
and he does a lot of fishing. That's his passion. And he's the grandfather now, he has two. Yeah, so I hear from Denny and Sally, and of course Don Clicker. Don was here recently, an event we went to. And who else am I thinking? Of course, Judy, I like to have contact with periodically. Get to see Barry once in a while. Don't get to see you as often. I was,
We'll have to change that.
yeah, I would like that.
Colorado Hills became sort of an isolation from Sacramento. I
Yeah.
just never crossed the county line after I moved up there.
Yeah, so, that's a cross-section of people that I think I would say I am in contact with.
Every time you mention a name, it brings back a series of memories.
I can't find Steve Walker anyplace. I don't know where they disappeared. They were from Davis, but, and Terry Ashford, when he lost his job in Auburn, he just totally disappeared. And he was such a nice guy and real talent. I miss Terry and Sandra. They were fun. And so it goes.
I do have a question. It's one that I heard in a previous interview
Okay.
that kind of struck. If you had anything that, words of wisdom to give someone who, new, whether it be students or new to the field, and with all the experiences that you've had, what might be some of those words of wisdom?
If it were a student, I think I would say, take advantage of every opportunity that you can to be involved with an agency and a department. Don't be afraid to take on a task or a job. Don't be afraid to make a mistake, because we can correct mistakes very easily. One of our favorites is that haven't found yet in Parks and Recreation that we're building any Patriot missiles, so it's really okay to not come through or have it fail, if you will. Get back up and come up with another idea. I think that's probably one of the things I always loved about our profession, was that you could make a mistake and you could always come back and do something or change it. So to a young person just getting started in business, don't be afraid. It's really good. I guess the other one would be, and I said a little while ago, I think that all of us at whatever level in our business sometimes need to ask ourselves if it is fair. Are we being fair to everyone as much as possible? And I'm not talking necessarily ethnically or regionally or whatever, but all the people we serve, are we doing an adequate job of recognizing their needs and so forth? Particularly in this day and age, I think that's important because there's a lot of diversity out there. I think that those would be probably the words I would impart on there. Yeah, I think that for now.
Well, in conclusion then, I think it's gone very well. Learned a lot about
No?
you that I certainly didn't know before. You have alluded to some of this, but I need to ask the final question, and that, what would you like people to remember about you?
I guess I would hope that it would be that in a small way, whatever it might be, that I made a contribution to the quality of life in the agencies and the communities that I've lived in. Shirley and I have been here in Sun City, which is, as you know, a senior development, for 20 years now. Yeah, and I've been elected to the board of directors twice. I became chairman of our foundation and served for 7 years and 2 years as president. I'm still on properties committee. Shirley's involved with Dial the Ride and knitting groups and so forth. I guess we've just never stopped doing something so that you have a reason for getting up every day, and your mind and your body get motivated and move. So I guess it would be that I might be remembered for having made a contribution to, I guess I said again, to the quality of our life, and I truly enjoy people. I think it's our best product, and I would like to be remembered for something other than a building with my name on it.
Okay, great, well, we certainly salute you, and we are all better individuals, but also professionals. So
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you
thank-
very much.
Well, and Dick knows this because it's been said many times, but I got into Parks and Recreation because of Dick. He is why I did what I did. And I think about how random that point was in my older high school years.
You've all heard it. He was 16 years old and he was sweeping floor at Woolworths.
When I wasn't washing dishes.
Yeah, he was doing everything.
Putting boxes.
And for me, I was, you hired me as an intern, as I remember now, at Portland Community, from an interview at Sac State.
I taught a class over there, and you came up after the class and said your background was in hospital
Yes, therapeutic.
therapeutic, and I said, you know what, young lady, you need some experience with community recreation.
Yes, and that's how I got into the community sector. And I worked at Fulton Community and got my start there. So you've all had a profound influence on us, and we thank you very much, very much.
Yeah, well, that I can take with me.
Okay, good.
Thanks. That's all. You don't want to hear what I want to say about Donald Trump, do you?